The election of Olusegun Obasanjo as president of Nigeria in 1999 effectively brought to an end his 16 years of military rule. Nigerians greeted the transition from military to civilian rule with widespread jubilation as they look forward to a new era of stability, peace, and prosperity. Welcome to Standpoint. I am Ademola Lawrence. Nigeria's democratic experience since the independence in 1960 has been a fracture who often resorts to divisive tendencies. And of course, this is one of the talking points we'll be looking at this episode of Standpoint, where we'll look at the 63 years of independence of Nigeria. October 1st is going to be tomorrow, and Nigeria is going to be celebrating its 60 years of independence from the colonial masters, the British. Joining me to talk about this, of course, in this discussion, is Professor of African History and Political Science, Toyin Falola, who is, of course, in the United States. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Toyin Falola. And along with him is the Professor of Political Science, and of course, he was a former Deputy Special Representative to the Secretary General for Somalia. I'm talking about Professor Babafemi Badejo, who is also a Professor of Political Science. Thank you both for joining me on the show today.
Yes, thank you very much, Demola.
Okay, let me start with you, Professor Babafemi. By tomorrow, which is, of course, October 1st, Nigeria is going to be celebrating its 63rd independence from the colonial masters. Looking at that journey and how Nigeria have been able to survive the coups, the socio-political vices that we have also faced, do you think that indeed we have probably come of age, or we are on the journey to a true democracy that Nigeria wants?
Well, I will say that we are very, very far from a true democracy. And I'm glad you put the word true democracy, because the tendency is for us to emphasize the fact that you have civil rule as democracy. You have elections as democracy. The only time in my own mind when Nigeria could ever have been, or a portion of Nigeria could ever have been said to have been democratic, would have been the period in which Babafemi Awolowo led Western Nigeria, in which case you had people who are representing a segment of the country, and they also performed tremendously. For me, I don't go by all these arguments of democracy is, I use the simplistic Abraham Lincoln government of the people, meaning that it is the people themselves and not some foreign entities that are governing them by the people. Then you are talking about the participation of the people in the democratic experiment. And when you are talking about that, election is just one small part of it. Then for the people, in that case, you're talking about the performance of the government in delivering what I call utmost freedom, the purpose of man. So if we have that at all, it was in that brief period that the Awolowo government in Western region of Nigeria provided so much beyond its taking power from the British at the time, beyond the Western region election, and he went into tremendous effort that made the lives of people like myself different. I normally joke with people that I would have been a roadside mechanic if I did not democratically deliver. I'm not saying that a roadside mechanic is not contributing to the country, but the fact that I'm talking to you and talking to other people represented the Secretary General in a number of places, working for the United Nations, come out of what our planted in that period. Are we going along that line? No. Are we building institutions to take us in that direction? I will divert a little bit to allow my boss to come in and make a joke of the fact that we are only the country where the president can disappear for 8 days and nobody is even asking, where is our president? I mean, and then you are talking about democracy. Institutions, building the appropriate institutions for governance, being in a position to provide leadership that delivers for people. Those are the kind of things that I would look at in talking about. And if you're asking me, in this, I started from the pre-independence and said that everything worked well, and then it halted. Of course, I'm not saying people have not tried. They have done a number of one step forward, 2, 3, 4 steps backward, and then another person comes and tries, and then we go in the same problem of leadership deficit, humongous corruption, lack of infrastructure. You want to talk about electricity, you want to talk about health, you want to talk about even simple sanitation, you want to talk about production of electricity, which could ginger development. But yeah, I don't think we should be celebrating anything personally, but that's just my own view.
Okay. Of course, that's your own opinion. Some also said that looking at where Nigeria is coming from since 1960 rather, there's been some progress. It's not uhuru to say that everything will be just fine as it is. Some also said no election or no democracy is perfect all around the world. But let me bring in Professor Toyin Falola, if you can hear me. Professor Toyin, can you hear me, sir?
Very much so.
Okay, so I want us to look at this from the aspect of what exactly is the issue with the Nigerian democracy? Is it from the cultural aspect of it? You know, probably when we got independence from the colonial masters in 1960, October 1st precisely, was it a matter of syncing with our cultural, was it syncing with our cultural belief? Or why does it seem that we are not getting it right, you know, to have democracy since independence?
Thank you very much. And we should not confuse democracy with a system that you use to govern yourself. So you can have democracy in a unitary system, democracy in a federal system. We should bear that in mind. So when Professor Badejo mentioned the Awolowo period, he was referring to democracy within a regional system, so that as this conversation goes on, we can also talk about the system. So, and we can also say, well, we are not under military rule because you do not want to be under military rule. We can see that as an achievement. We can say that where elections are fair and people vote and their votes are counted and the outcome is the people they want in power, that's a very good idea. As in some local governments or as in some states where they did not rig those elections. And we can also say that democracy as a working project will keep unfolding and hope that 4 years' time will be better, that the INEC will conduct free and fair elections and the civil society will be active. Having said that, these are the issues. We have politicians, and Nigerian politicians, when it comes to political calculations, they are one of the very best in the world. You can't beat them. They're very good at that job. But we have no governance, and that is the problem. You can have good politicians managing what you call democracy, but it does not mean that those good politicians can deliver governance. Second, whether you rig elections or not, this democracy has been providing leadership. We've always had leaders. They may go to court, as they are doing now. Atiku may be angry, as he has been, but eventually we've had governors, we have presidents. So there's leadership. But the problem is we don't have strong institutions. So that democracy is making those elections to produce the governors and the chair of local governments and presidents, but it's not empowering those institutions. For instance, we do not have powerful institutions of transparency, and we do not have powerful institutions of accountability. We have the EFCC, Anti-Corruption Agency, but those are not stopping people from not being corrupt. That's the second problem. Then we have the third problem, which Professor Badejo has highlighted efficiently: democracy without dividends. So, because the object of democracy, its end result is to produce dividends in good governance. When there was a huge debate and many people met in Egypt, and they asked us to define democracy in the African context, we were very clear that we cannot define democracy outside of development. That your citizens they want you to eliminate poverty. They want you to give them jobs. They want you to give them hospitals. So if that democracy does not produce those dividends, you lose them. You lose them. It simply becomes a form of government that does not deliver. And then one final point, we have political parties. Or these political parties exist to contest elections. They exist to solve conflicts among themselves. They are not different from one another, and the agenda of development is not core to their mission. So we have political parties, but what do? No development platform. So as the country moves forward, we hope that this democracy will produce transparency, the democracy will produce accountability, the democracy will produce political parties whose agenda is to be about development, and the democracy will produce strong institutions. Thank you for that brilliant question.
Okay, so I still want to stay with you, Prof. You know, when you said that trying to define democracy in the African context, some have said, you know, what is applicable, for example, to the citizens of the United States might not be applicable to the realities of what we're facing here back in Nigeria, for example. So don't you think that we need to fashion out a way that things that will please us as Nigerians, that is what we should lay down?
And I agree with you totally that democracy is like Christianity, like Islam. Like anything that you borrow from abroad, you have to domesticate it. You have to translate it into what will work for you. You have to adapt it. For instance, democracy does not mean I'm not going to respect Professor Badejo is older than me. And democracy does not mean I won't respect you who is younger than me. Democracy does not mean that I will not respect poor people on the streets. So those things can be domesticated. But at the same time, democracy must apply to our own core projects. So the US does no longer deals in small issues, electricity, water supply. They don't deal in those small issues anymore, garbage collection. But in our own form of democracy, we still have to deal with the basic issues. How can people have jobs? How can we clean the streets? Democracy, if you don't convince your citizens that their life is going to improve, they are not going to be committed to that democracy themselves. And they've demonstrated it in stomach infrastructure. Give me money, let me vote for you. Give me bread and rice, let me vote for you. Why? Because once you've won the election, I will not see you again. Our people are extremely intelligent. They're extremely smart. They know what they want. And what they want is to elevate their standard of living. There's no question. Anybody you see on the street will tell you the purpose of a good government is to improve my life. And that is where we have to do the fix and the fixes in our democracy. Thank you.
Okay, let me come to you, Professor Babafemi. I want us to backtrack a bit and going back to, when you mentioned Chief Babafemi Awolowo during his days as the Premier of the Western region, and you have the likes of Ahmadu Bello and, of course, Nnamdi Ezekwe and all of them. But I just want us to backtrack a bit in terms of the things that happen between that era, where you have these persons lay down what the tenet should be or what should be obtainable in our own settings back here at home after moving from the colonial era. Do you think that we have actually maintained those tenets or we are deviating from it? Just to move further in my question, do you also think that the coups that have happened in Nigeria also, truncate the development or the progressive nature of how democracy should go in Nigeria?
Well, it's a very good question you have posed. I mean, two double-barreled questions that you have posed. There is no doubt that a lot of effort, when you examine the history, which Professor Falola is a very great expert of that period. You're talking about just before independence and then through to immediately after independence. They indeed, in their respective regions, were setting up some yardsticks, some criteria to be able to achieve development. I will only be suggesting that Babafemi Awolowo had strides. He had over-prepared for governance, and he delivered in that respect. But there are other problems that must be looked at. The political parties of the period had some ideological orientation. I was talking about social democracy and very, very clearly, and Zeke and Ahmadu Bello were also. But that we have failed in that respect. But I am not one of those that want to put everything at the doorstep of the military. Yes, the military period was problematic, but how did we get into the military period? It was because of the failure of the civilians of the period and the high-handedness, and you now found a group of people that gave the impression that they were going to change the whole order and allow the civil rule to continue. In that respect, there was a clear failure. But don't forget, because we tend to say 1999, 1999, then a lot of pressures all over the
Prof,
yes.
I want to just interject there and say that, when you say you don't want to probably put everything into the blame on the military, the baby was just born like 6 years. I'm talking about Nigeria just gained independence in 1960, and the first coup happened in 1966. So the baby was just trying to walk and trying to gain his stamina. And all of a sudden, a coup happened. How do you explain that, without putting that on the military? And to also go further, because you were initially saying that the likes of Babafemi Awolowo and all of them. So are you also saying their programs were not intended with the realities of what is happening to the Nigerian people at the time?
Well, Demola, what you're posing is very interesting. by is it 51? We were already having self-government. The compulsory free primary education in Western Nigeria was already in place by 1955. All these, some of these carried on even to the period under the military. But the hour that we were talking about, where was he when the coup took place? Awo had been jailed on what he and his supporters says were trumped up charges that was meant to, that ended up, let me not say meant to, that ended up disrupting the same Western region we were talking about, where progress was being made. The military didn't do that, okay? So if we are talking about, I'm not saying don't blame the military, but we find it so easy to always want to put all the problems elsewhere. If we're not putting it on the foreigners, we are putting it on the military. But look at, we now had 79, the civilian regime came in, and what happened? It became impossible. The rigging of the elections of 1983 made me decide I will never go to any voting poll again since 1983. What all of a sudden, Ofonagoro started calling landslide on NTA. Of course, prepared the whole environment in which Buhari Diagbon came back. And then we have had the 1999 experience, and people are counting. Coups are no longer in fashion, except now that it is coming back. But the problem of performance remains. So if we are having leadership deficits in our country, largely on our continent, because look at Asia, compare us with Asia and other places. But if we are having leadership deficit, I'm saying we should engage with these politicians to make them see their failure as accounting for some of those interruptions, which none of us is saying is desirable, but that look at the greed that is taking place in the last 8 to 9 years, or if you like, stretch it to 1999. Then you tell me we are totally going towards bankruptcy. 95% being used to service debts, and the money is sitting in different accounts of different people, and we are not bold enough to say that we need to re-engage, collect what people have stolen to make life overall different from our people. Okay. But we are dancing around.
Okay.
Yes.
Prof, I'll still come back to you. I want Professor Toyin to also, say something about this, and because I also know that it's your area of specialization, you like to talk about the fact that coups are not great for any country. But look at, if you have to measure Nigeria's journey to democracy and how things have been truncated over time, you start from, like I mentioned to him, the January 1966 coup, the counter coup, of course, which happened in July, and you look at the coup that coup brought in Aguiyi-Ironsi. Then the other one that came in, of course, brought in Yakubu Gowon. You look at all those coups, which also brought in former military head of state, talking about General Muhammadu Buhari, then going into Babangida, then going into Sani Abacha. You don't think that all of those things over time also draws back in actually getting the desired result that we have? To also point out, the second leg of my question is that, do you think that Nigeria has really, indeed recovered? Or is there a handshake over the Niger that has been settled between that 1967 to 1970? Have we really done that?
Thank you for that loaded question. And I will start by saying that all the variables, factors that produced the Nigerian Civil War, 67 to 70, remain with us. In other words, the wars, the causes have not been resolved. Second, the anger that that war generated remains with us. And you see it in Kanu, IPOB, Biafra. And it's very unusual to fight a war of that magnitude and nature without bringing resolution. The Igbo people are angry. This is a fact. They are angry. And part of the anger is based on the very fact that those wars, the challenges, and what led to them have not been fully resolved. But they are not the only angry people. The minorities in the north are very angry, especially in the Middle Belt. Bear in mind that but for the coup, it was difficult for Middle Belters to have come to power. When you mention Gowon and many of these people, it was a coup that gave them a chance. And bear in mind, but for the way Obasanjo cleverly manipulated the PDP, and a German in person of Jonathan Goodluck will I find it difficult to come to power. Those issues are still there. And remember, these issues dated to the 1950s. How do you balance the interest of the larger group with those of the smaller ethnic groups? We have not been able to resolve that. Suppose I were an Igede from Benue State. What is my chance of becoming the president of Nigeria or even becoming the governor of Benue State? My chances are very small. So we have over half the population coming from small ethnicities who don't even stand a chance of becoming the presidents of their own country. That is not good. That is not good. Second, we have unresolved issues around over-centralization. The coup brought that centralized federal system, and we are yet to break away from that. When you hear about the Oduduwa Republic, when people talk about restructuring, when people talk about they're not being happy with the arrangement, it is all about the power that has been given to the federal government in Abuja. And it was the coup that brought that over-centralization to the extent now that our brothers and sisters in the north do not join in that restructuring project. Point number 4, how the federal system in managing its revenues is extremely dysfunctional. The tiny corner of the country that we call the Delta virtually fills the entire country. So we have in this union, in this polygamous union, many wives very angry with their one husband. We have states in the union that are not contributing sufficiently to the federal wallet. They're not contributing, but they're deriving maximum benefit from where? From Niger Delta. Because of the way the fiscal federalism is arranged, money comes from Niger Delta. The bulk of the other money comes from Lagos Port Authority, and we have taxes collected in the South. That is one of the reasons in 1914 that led to the amalgamation. Use the proceeds of the customs in Lagos to finance the North and other parts. We have not been able to manage that fiscal federalism, and it keeps producing anger and anger and anger. Lagos State is richer than Ghana. Lagos State is richer than many African countries, but it's not the only one benefiting from its resources. If Niger Delta were to be in the US in the federal system, it will be the richest set of states in the country. And if you calculate it very well, it will be one of the largest economies in the world. But other units in the federal system are pounced on that revenue. That dated back to this military. And finally, issues of religious identities remain, in which politicians in all these regions take religiosity and just convert it to power and domination, such that even in producing ambassadors, producing ministers, producing heads of parastatals, from the crisis that you pointed, you alluded to in the 60s, they continue. How many Muslims are ministers? How many Christians are ministers? How many Muslims are vice chancellors? And things keep degenerating as we revive these older identities. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, it's been an interesting one. We'll go on a break. When we come back, we're still looking at the journey of Nigeria to democracy. And this time around, we'll be looking at from 1999 downwards to 2023, Nigeria has experienced uninterrupted democracy in the last 24 years. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. This is Standpoint, and we're looking at the Nigeria's journey to democracy since in the last 63 years of independence after Nigeria got independence from the colonial era. And I've been talking to Professor of Political Science, Babafemi, Babafemi Badejo, who is, of course, a special representative to the Secretary General for Somalia, a deputy representative under United Nations, and, of course, African historian and a political scientist talking about Toyin Falola. They've both been x-raying the journey of Nigeria democracy from 1960 up until now. But we'll go straight into the 1999, when Nigeria, of course, after that particular election in 1993, which produced MK Abiola, but never became the president. And in 1998, another election, of course, was conducted. By 1999, Olusegun Obasanjo became the first president, of course, in the post-military era to become the president of Nigeria. And talking about that, so many issues have come up as Nigeria really, really enjoyed the dividends of democracy from that time. 24 years, some have said that Nigeria is not moving. Some have said we're crawling. Some have said we are taking a baby step. Some have even said that we are actually on the right step, going the way it should go. I'm going to ask you first, Professor Toyin, looking at this from 1999, 24 years now, do you think that we have actually, gained that momentum? And if we have not, what are the things that we need to begin to do? Somebody who is 24 years of age, of course, probably in this part of the world, would say would have gotten married, would have started a family. So what do we do? How do we get away from this quagmire that some persons have said we are?
Obasanjo was a military man who had governed before. Fast forward, Buhari was a military man. Of this period, you are talking about 16 years. You are looking at the continuation of a military ethos of governance. Obasanjo demonstrated instances of governing as if he was a general. Even recently, in talking to Yoruba Oba, he was speaking to them as a general. Stand up, get down. That's a way of thinking. And you could see in the management of his affairs as a president, he was behaving as if the barrack was still part of Aso Rock. So let us bear that in mind. On the plus side, remember, that the country in 1960 was around 50 million. Remember, today is 200 million. And remember, in 25 years, Nigeria will become the third largest country in the world with over 400 million people, and declining population in Russia, declining population in Spain, declining population in China. Second, the capacity to feed that population, we must commend the people we do not talk about. We don't talk about the women selling tomatoes on the streets. We never show gratitude to the farmers. Remember, forget the elite who eat their noodles and their bread, that many people actually survive on locally produced food. In Ghana today, there is scarcity of onion because they closed borders with Niger. Remember that the basic food for survival in Nigeria, many of it, especially carbohydrates, come from the country. We have to pay attention to that. Remember how many universities we had in 1960. Now we have over 200. So, to answer your question very well, we have to balance the pluses and the minuses and the contradictions. We've grown in massive population. That demography is a huge advantage, but we have not been able to know what to do with that human capacity. And human capacity is the best thing that God himself can give to any country. What then do we do with that? Remember the contradiction that our people are very religious. Near your studio in Lagos, when you step out, count the number of churches, count the number of mosques. Our people are very religious. They talk in terms of ethics and morality, but we are very deficient, and we have values that promote corruption. Remember that we are one of the most youthful population in the world. What we have, Japan is praying to have that demographic ratio that Nigeria has. Sweden is praying to have that demographic ratio. Many countries are praying to have that demographic ratio that we have in Nigeria. But what do we do with it? We don't do good things with it. What can we do in moving forward? We have to reduce the cost of governance. It is too expensive. What are we doing with 36 commissioners of works, with one federal commissioner of work? What are we doing with 36 commissioners of everything? What are we doing with 48 ministers? What are we doing with that number of senators? What are we doing with those numbers of House of Representatives and the emoluments and the salary? We have to reduce the cost of governance. Of the total revenues that Nigerians collect, in some years, we spend over 80% of those revenues on bureaucracy, on the cost of governance. It's not going to work. Call that system anything. Even call it military rule, call it democracy. You cannot spend 80% of your resources outside the basic principle of governance. Okay. Second, we have to recapitalize the poor. The poor are doing so badly. Many of us who went to school were not sent to school by rich parents. We were sent to school by poor parents. How do we empower those poor parents? And final point, because you want to stop me, we have to transfer power back to communities. We've taken too much power from communities, and we have to figure out in this democratic arrangement how to reallocate power back to those communities. Thank you.
Okay. I want to be very sure that I heard you right when you said that the resources, we don't have enough money. So I want to, and the resources are not enough, but I want to be very sure. But if, I just wanted to be very sure, is that what you meant, that there's no enough money?
Yes. No. You see, because politicians are very corrupt, we tend to assume that the country is rich.
Okay. I just wanted to,
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that.
We do not have enough resources to transform the lives of 200 million people very rapidly.
Okay, sir. Okay, so Professor Babafemi, I want to, do you agree with what Professor Toyin said by saying that Nigeria does not have enough money, to cater for its citizens? That is the first leg.
Million people. Yeah.
That's the first leg of my question. Hold on, sir. That's the first leg of my. And he also mentioned the fact that we have grown in numbers. So what we were in for example, if we are talking in the context of 24 years, what we were in 1999 is not what we are presently in 2023. So how do you think government needs to be proactive in looking at policies that will, give way to Nigerians and the welfare of Nigerians in years to come? So they have to plan. What are the policies do you think that we need to look at to plan for the nation Nigeria? Those are the two questions I want to ask you.
Well, on the main question, which is coming from what Professor Falola said, Professor Falola is correct to some extent. He is looking at the quantum of money we have today, and that quantum of money being used by 200 million people. It is peanuts, because what we are talking about is less than some of the some American companies. Okay, let's not go into states in the United States and what California is worth. But for me, the most important resource that we have is that 200 million people. The issue, which he also mentioned, is how do we transform that 200 million people into being able to do wonders? Now, in my own lifetime, Deng Xiaoping, you may not know who he is, built on Mao Zedong's efforts in China. And you're talking about a population that at that time when Deng started would be, I don't know the exact figure, but would be like over 800 million people for sure. And now, today, they went over to the 1.4 and are trying to build it, to bring it back realistically. And they've been able to lift so many people out of poverty. How did they do that? I just told you, Deng Xiaoping started from about 1978 to invest in the Chinese people, to curb corruption amongst Chinese people, build leadership among the Chinese people, which leadership addressed community levels that Professor Falola was talking about, and you had different levels of production taking place in China. And the totality of it is what we are now seeing today, that the Chinese have been able to build so much with respect to resources. And it's not the Chinese alone. The Indians are doing the same thing. A number of other Asian countries, take Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad's effort in Malaysia, when we were busy fighting ourselves, stealing money, and even if those monies were being stolen and were being invested in productive capacities, taking people off the road. Look at how many people are busy driving kekenapep all over the place. If people had the vision that we are associating with them, and they had made massive transport arrangements and whatever, those people can go into producing several other things, even if it is onion we are talking about. But no country has been able to do it without industrialization. Look at what has become of what you call it, Ajaokuta. It never got off the ground. If we got all those things running, if we have the infrastructure that links several places, then we will be talking about production that will then have resources coming in from selling those things after we have taken care of our own needs, selling of it to the rest of Africa, to the rest of the world. And that's why I'm saying that the most important resource is that of human capacity that we have. It is the fact that we allow them to remain underemployed because our leadership are not focused in that direction. Our leadership are sitting down in the National Assembly and just pocketing money and sharing as they like, and as they share, they take the money into Europe, or of late, they buy dollars, suck up the dollars out of the market, and it's not possible for those who are producing to have enough dollars because these people are storing dollars in their water tanks are no longer naira because it's becoming too bulky and whatever. We can never get anywhere with all that. I have spoken about industrialization. There is no way that if we don't address the issue of technology and adding to the question of steel and all the rest of it and manufacturing is the AI that people are leapfrogging on. Is the artificial intelligence, the ICT that people are doing, they are investing in. I am happy that some of the positive aspects of our 63 years are some young Nigerians who are doing some of these things successfully, but not at the scale of a purposeful, visionary leadership that says we are going to produce for the world. Look at what the Indians have done. You enter into any of the major companies in ICT, Google, Microsoft, the this, the that, and all the rest of it. The Indians are producing the CEOs of these entities for the rest of the world. What are we doing? Why are we not building this youth bulge that we have into some of them producing our food? And Prof is right that especially with respect to carbohydrate and protein to some extent, those who are fish farming, aquaculture, and all the rest of it, the poultry that they are doing is running into crisis because of not enough maize and all other ingredients that are necessary. What are we doing as a government to make all this happen? Simple planting of paper pulps in order to not import 5 billion of paper into the country annually, but to be selling to other portions of the continent. We lack leadership. We lack leadership.
Okay.
Leadership deficit is a major portion of that problem.
Okay.
Demola, I will leave you alone. Thank you very much.
Okay, Prof, while we round up the show, there's a lot to talk about. But while we round up the show, in just 30 seconds for both of you, one of the issues that I also want us to look at is the issue of religion and tribalism. How entrenched it has been in our democracy and the journey to our democracy. How do you think that we need to deal with this in substituting it for competency and capability? Just in 30 seconds. I'll start with you, Professor Babafemi. Just in 30 seconds, sir.
In 30 seconds, it's unfortunate that it even worsened with the last election. Because at a point in my younger days, we were thinking that religious focus and ethnicity focus, when people like Okudiba Anoli published his politicization of ethnicity, can be addressed and change those things around. But it is worsening. What can we do about it? We need to confront these problems. We need to look at why are we killing ourselves, destroy our country over Abrahamic religions. What has happened to our own, that's a different level of, because when Prof spoke about the Yoruba Obas say that they are Igbakeji Orisha, but they don't want to have anything to do with that Orisha. They are dealing with the Abrahamic religions, and then they expect to have the same respect. But okay, it's a tall order question that, yes, we confront it by having a leadership with the vision that here is a single country. Look at the injustices of to the different parts, and look into some of the things that we have even put in place over time.
All right. Okay, sir. So our time is fast spent, but let me just give you, Professor Falola, just the last 30 seconds. What do you think we need to do?
If we reduce poverty, some of these issues will reduce.
Okay.
If we increase the number of our middle class,
okay,
that will shift their focus to career issues. And finally, if we rethink our education system at all levels, civic education, we can focus on people who are under the age of 20 and begin to build a new generation of new Nigerians. We need new Nigerians to manage the Nigerian of the future. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. It's been an interesting conversation here on Standpoint, where we x-ray the Nigerian journey to democracy since 1960. And of course, it's been a wonderful one to have both Professor Toyin Falola, a professor of African history and of course political science, and Professor Babafemi Badejo, a professor of political science and a special deputy envoy to Somalia there. Thank you very much for both joining the show today. And that's going to be our show for today. Join us later for 11 p.m. this night as a repeat of the program, and for 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. My name is Ademola Lawrence. Congratulations to Nigeria. Happy independence.